Hello, Booktube. I was in the heart of downtown Boston very, very early this morning, and so I ended up at the Brattle Bookshop right as they were opening. That's a great used bookstore in downtown Boston, just full of books. They have a very high turnover. They're always out buying, and they have a huge sale lot right next door to the shop that is thousands more books at $1, $3, and $5. I spend a lot of time out in that sale lot. I hardly ever go. I always go inside the shop to say hi to the people there and to look around. The buying table inside the shop is especially attractive because you get to see the sort of stuff that's coming in. But I do most of my shopping out in the sale lot so that you're not breaking the bank. So that you, as I've said many times, so that the thing that determines when you stop is how much you can carry, not how much you can afford. I like that very much so. So I went to the Brattle this morning and I browsed to my heart's content. And I got a pile of books that I want to show you. And when you add this pile of books to all the other piles of Brattle books that I've got in the last 2 months, you get a lot of books. So I want to stress, again, a point that I've made on this channel before, which is that the goal here is not just to reach my carrying capacity of books. The goal is for books in every one of these Brattle hauls to be keepers. Things that I keep for a long time. Things that I don't plan on just cycling right through. Or things that I plan on giving as gifts. So it's always satisfactory to me. It's always very satisfying to me when I pull a book off a shelf here at Hyde Cottage that I need for something. Either I want to reread it or I need to look up something in it for a review that I'm writing or a book that I'm researching. And I check to see when I got it, and it's always very encouraging when it's inscribed from the Brattle from 10 or even 20 or even 30 years ago. That is just a wonderful feeling. That means that that day, the details of which have long since escaped me, although they haven't escaped my journal. I included them in my journal all the time, but the memory of which has long since escaped me, that day I found a keeper. That's a great feeling. So that, I'm hoping, underscores a lot of these books today, is that I'm hoping I hold on to a lot of these for a long time, or get rid of them right away to a welcome home. And there are a number of categories that books fall into at the Brattle. You don't go to the Brattle, especially the sale lot, wanting anything. That's a bad idea. You won't find what you're looking for, and you won't find anything else either. You have to go and let the Brattle sale lot tell you what it wants you to have. You want to go and align yourself with the synchronicity. What is showing up at the sale lot? What isn't showing up? What sorts of things are being suggested to you? It's a perfect exercise in keeping an open mind as a reader. But nevertheless, patterns emerge. I've always said the Brattle, for instance, is a great place for second chances because the books are so cheap. If you encounter a book that you had a decidedly negative opinion about, or even an undecided opinion about, years ago when you first encountered it, it is chump change to get another copy and give it another try. That's wonderful. I've also said a phrase of mine is the Brattle will provide, where I notice something that I want here at Hyde Cottage, either a specific thing or a categorical thing, and I just say to myself, the Brattle will provide. Sooner or later, a thing that fills that void will show up at the Brattle Bookshop. It's a very different thing to say that and just leave it to chance than it is to make a mental list, or even a written list, God help us all, and go there with that list in hand. That is just tempting the gods. But saying the Brattle will provide, having faith that the Brattle will provide, is a totally different thing. I often go there wondering, I keep a mental list of just sort of things that are lacking here and just wondering, someday the Brattle will provide it. No pressure, no expectation. And in addition to those categories which have served me for so long, I think it's long since time that I started officially adding another category. It's been an unofficial category for 5 years, and that is Booktube Books. And not so much recommendations from booktubers for something that I should try. That almost never happens. But something more heartfelt, and I think more genuine, where I'm watching a booktuber's channel and they're not trying to sell me on anything, they're not trying to pitch anything to me, but I notice that they love something, or that they really like it, or they esteem it in a different level than I do. And maybe that's because I haven't revisited the thing, whatever it is, in a long, long time, or maybe it's because I have revisited the thing, but I didn't like it. It means something. It for me anyway, and I think for a lot of readers, it really should set you back a little if a reader whose judgment you respect holds up that thing and says, I really like this. That, instead of making you extra urgent to change their mind, it should make you think, well, what did I miss then? And I often do think that now, and I think that a lot thanks to Booktube. I used to think it in my pre-Booktube days, I used to think it because a lot of my friends are book critics. But with Booktube, there's something else. Mainly, I think, ironically enough, because most of you aren't book critics. That makes the heartfelt nature of these unofficial recommendations all the more prominent for me. So we're going to start this book haul with one of those Booktube books, and we're going to end it with one of those Booktube books, and I imagine other categories will crop up in between. We're going to start the haul with this. This is Jerome K. Jerome, 3 Men in a Boat. It is one of those quintessentially unclassifiable English classics about 3 men, to say nothing of a dog, in a boat. And if you've ever watched Mark's channel, Book Time with Elvis, you know this is his favorite book. He loves it dearly and quotes from it and can't help but look back to it often, even when he's trying not to, even when he's worried that he's getting tedious on the subject. That's the way of it, right? If you have a favorite book, you know that that's the way of it. I haven't read this thing in eons. I loved it. I remember loving it when I did read it. And every time I've seen Mark mention it or try hard not to mention it on his channel, I've smiled a little and thought, it's long since time that you revisited that book. When I saw it at the Brattle bookshop this morning for $1, I grabbed it. I realized months ago, I think when I first started watching Book Time with Elvis, that I didn't have a copy. Now I do. Now I do. So rereading 3 Men in a Boat is on the docket for this summer. Because how could it not? It's not Mark out there proselytizing. It's just, this is a reader who, thanks to making videos, has allowed me to know him as a reader just a bit, and that is enough for me to want to revisit his favorite book. So I'm going to do that. Well, this next one is a trade paperback, or mass market rather, and if I have an option to get a trade paperback or a hardcover of a book that I want to reread, I'll almost always take that, but I didn't today, and the minute I saw the book, I thought, I do want to reread this, so I got the mass market. I'm not sure how, it's not just, mass market paperbacks are little paperbacks, this size paperback, and a lot of people abandon them because they are more of a strain on the eye than a bigger trade paperback or a hardcover. Some people abandon them because there's more room for marginalia in a larger copy. I tend to abandon them because I tend to be a little rough on my stuff, including books. And mass market paperbacks, they don't hold up to punishment. They really don't. So I'm going to try to be nice to this thing, and we shall see. This is The Kingdom of the Wicked by Anthony Burgess. This paperback, if the equivalent of Anthony Burgess today would never have a book come out in mass market paperback, but this was in the middle of the so-called paperback revolution, so you got all sorts of stuff that came out, serious and not. And this is Anthony Burgess. He was a terrific writer. I cannot sing his praises highly enough. But he could have a shark-like mercantile squint to his choice of literary projects. You get to a point where you're a thoroughgoing professional. I think by the time Burgess wrote this book, he'd written 100 books. So you reach a point where you are a thoroughgoing professional. So when you get, it's not a question of the muses inspiring you on Mount Helicon at all. Instead, it's like the construction business. You decide, okay, what project am I going to work on next? And from long experience what is entailed in that project. And it's a lot. It's a lot. You have to block out time every day. If you're a blackout alcoholic like Burgess, that's not easy to do. If you're a floozy for every television show or radio guest appearance, that's not easy to do. Burgess also kept up a very active slate of my own profession, of paid occasional writing. He kept up a very active slate of that, and he never revised, and he dashed things off at lightning speed, but even so, that eats into your day. So when you're trundling along and you think, okay, it's time for a new literary project, it does take a lot of consideration. You can't just take things on lightly. And Burgess had a breakout hit. Of course, by the time he wrote this book, he knew the book for which he would be permanently synonymous, and that is A Clockwork Orange. But Robert Graves had a stratospheric breakout hit with his book I, Claudius, and then later Claudius the God. And Graves was castigated by some critics in a way that got right under his skin. Graves, in later life, looked like a Roman emperor himself, but he had the thin as a tween high school teenager. And when critics said, well, I, Claudius is very entertaining, but all it is Robert Graves retailing Suetonius, he was infuriated by that. He used to rant about it to guests in private for an hour at a time, how that wasn't true. That absolutely wasn't true. And Anthony Burgess, old stager that he was, saw, well, okay, Graves was accused of simply ransacking Suetonius and making a pile of money in doing so. And so after Man of Nazareth, Burgess decided to ransack Tacitus. That's basically what this is. This is basically a novelization of the most sensationalistic stories from Tacitus, almost none of which have any grounding in fact. But there is a great deal of research involved too. It was phenomenal, the amount of work that Burgess could do, considering the impediments that he himself imposed on his life. Mainly three: non-stop smoking, so that by the end of a day he felt closer to death than he'd felt that morning. Not non-stop, but a gigantic amount of drinking, and also all of that occasional work that waits for no man. Even if you're Anthony Burgess, if you take on occasional work for a newspaper, for instance, or for a popular press that has an edition going to the printer, if you've promised a preface, they need it. They can't wait forever. Not everything is Virginia Woolf and the TLS. So he took on a lot of work that his word was that oppressed him every day. You take on those three impediments, it's kind of amazing how much work he got done and how much research he got done. This is a thoroughly delightful historical novel about the first century and change of the Christian Roman Empire. Not after Constantine, but I mean the Roman Empire as it entwines with St. Paul and with the burgeoning Christianity. So if you like that kind of a period, The Kingdom of the Wicked is a tremendously good read. Tremendously good. Then this next one is an example of a category of book the Brattle will provide. In this case, fairly rapidly. I showed you in just the last Brattle haul, or maybe the one right before that, a book by Charles Sevilla that was called Wilkes on Trial, about an intrepid lawyer, actually a group of ragtag intrepid lawyers. The book was mainly designed to sort of make great stories out of all the law court and legal anecdotes that the author knew really well. And Wilkes on Trial was a sequel. There was a book before it called Wilkes, His Life and Crimes that I had once upon a time, and I remember even decades ago when I loved Wilkes on Trial, I thought Wilkes, His Life and Crimes was hard to find, and when I saw Wilkes on Trial again at the Brattle recently, I grabbed it, of course, because I wanted. But I also thought, oh, well, here we go again. You don't have Wilkes, His Life and Crimes, and it will be the devil's own trouble to find it. But no, no, there it is. Again, with the Peter DeSeve cover, this is the first book. It's not a hardcover, but probably it was never issued in hardcover. One way or another, tremendously happy to have this. Tremendously happy. So now I have both of them again and can reread them to my heart's content. Then these next three are mass market paperbacks. This will be the last of our mass market paperbacks, and these are really nicely designed. This is the Penguin Classic Crime series from decades ago that had the green top, the green bottom, and a sort of a white banner around the middle that dealt with classic Golden Age novels of mystery and suspense. And I love them. I've never encountered one, even from an author that I don't know, that I didn't love. And I found three of them today at the Brattle in perfect condition. They still have the sheen on them from the mass market cover, even though these can't be any younger than 45 years old. I think that's amazing. They're in perfect condition, and they are an author I dearly, dearly love. And that author is Marjorie Allingham. I didn't find all the Penguin Classic Crimes of Marjorie Allingham. I'm pretty sure they came out with everything. I hauled one of them on this channel years ago at a Brattle haul called Cargo of Eagles, which is a Marjorie Allingham novel that's not an Albert Campion novel. It's not. She had a recurring character named Albert Campion, who was started off kind of as a comedy figure, kind of a pastiche of the amateur detective, but then he grew with the telling as he caught on with readers right away, and then he caught on with the author, as that sometimes happens, and suddenly became a far more fleshed out character. And I cannot recommend these mysteries strong enough. They are so good. They are so well written, so smart. Not people have often said that the Lord Peter Wimsey mysteries of Dorothy Sayers read as if somebody tried to set Bertie Wooster, P.G. Woodhouse's Bertie Wooster, to solving crimes. And I never really totally agreed with that one way or another, but that kind of quintessentially Edwardian sparkle absolutely fills the Campion books, and I love them for that. I found 3 of them in perfect condition. First one is The Beckoning Lady. See, this is the Penguin Books Classic Crime series. No idea why they chose this photograph of Marjorie Allingham, where she looks like a homicidal murderer, something that Campion would catch, that he would detect in a crowd. There were actually far more appealing pictures than that. We have The Beckoning Lady. We have Hide My Eyes. Look at that. Omnibus and a police call box. How wonderful. And then what I view as Marjorie Allingham's second best book, really, really a masterpiece of Golden Age mystery, and that is Fashion in Shrouds. The very best book that this author wrote, Police at the Funeral, an immortal book called Police at the Funeral, I did not find in these old Penguin classic crime paperbacks. Wish I had. I don't know if these are the tip of the iceberg. That's another thing that you often see at the Brattle, is that you'll see something in a set. You'll see bits and pieces of something in a set, and you just have the feeling that probably the person who sold it to the Brattle, however many months or years ago, sold the whole set, and you just have to be patient. One way or another, if I'm not going to find them all, I mean, I have Marjorie Allingham on ebook, and that is great, because I have a tablet near me at all times. So if I'm, laying in bed, I've got Frida on top of me, I don't want to move, I don't want to disturb anybody, let's say she's sound asleep, then the tablet is within reach. The books are not. So I have all of them on ebooks, but I would very much like to find, at the very least, Police at the Funeral in this format. But one way or another, I was happy to find these 3. Sometimes you want both, right? Sometimes you want the little mass market paperback as well as the ebook. Then this next one, I don't want this next book to give you any ideas, okay? Some of you know who you are. I don't want this giving you any ideas. This is a New Yorker book of cartoons. I've mentioned many times that I love New Yorker books of cartoons. I think they speak their own language. I think they are sublime. In a genuine way, I think they are sublime. And this is the New Yorker book of cat cartoons. Okay? But this does not mean that I am defecting to the dark side. I not only play for the other team, I am the captain of the other team. I got this book mainly because of a New Yorker cartoonist named Helen Hokinson, unfortunately no longer with us, who did a wonderful New Yorker cartoons for the whole of her adult career. I have all of the Helen Hokinson books, and I had a feeling that there is no such thing as the complete Helen Hokinson. There should be, but there isn't. And what I wouldn't give, somebody did a complete cartoon catalog of Helen Hokinson, plus a biography. Wouldn't that be incredible? I know the paperwork is there. I know that it's possible to make such a book. But one way or another, I knew that there would be Helen Hokinson cartoons in here that I did not see, that I don't have in any of my collected Helen Hokinson. I was right. There's no fewer than 3 of them. And I'm going to show you all of them. Just because I want you to know that I didn't get this thing because I think cats are cute. Cats are revolting. They are spawns of Satan. But here's the first one. The caption is, "Guess what we've done? We've caught a mouse." There's the cartoon. Helen Hokinson, what she referred to as my best girls. These over-endowed and over-dowered Larchmont wives who don't work and who are wonderfully clueless. They're wonderfully innocent. And they're constantly saying gentle little malapropisms like, we caught a mouse. And you'll see the other two are just like that in here. We'll just page through and find them. They are evenly spaced. Here's another one. The caption is, of course, some cats have 8 kittens, but I never have more than 6. And see how proud she is, but she's saying that she has kittens. That makes it, it's a kind of New Yorker humor. You just have to get it, okay? And nothing is better for New Yorker humor than Helen Hokinson. There's a Dan Shanahan in here. He's also one of my favorites, but I'm not sure if you're going to get this. Budgie deficit. A little play on budget deficit. I'm not sure how much that plays. But there's one other Helen Hokinson. The caption is it all right for an expectant mother to catch chipmunks? And it's the cat. It's not her. It's the cat. Is it all right for an expectant mother to catch chipmunks? But there is one cartoon in here that I think perfectly sums up the cat owning experience. I think it perfectly sums up what it's like to live with a cat. Those of you who have cats won't need any more than just the picture, but for those of you who can't make out the details, I will read the caption. The caption is, I believe I've earned the right to your respect. And that is the cartoon. I believe that will be gruesomely familiar to those of you who have cats. And maybe even the hapless protestation. I believe I've earned the right to your respect. So I got the New Yorker Book of Cat cartoons. I have the New Yorker Book of Dog cartoons, Doctor cartoons, Lawyer cartoons, Critic cartoons. I love them. Absolutely love them. And it's an extra treat to have more Helen Hokinson cartoons that I didn't have anywhere else. Maybe someday, if anybody ever does it, maybe someday there will be a complete Helen Hokinson. That would be wonderful. This next one is a novel, and maybe it falls under the heading of second chances at the Brattle, although I got the advance copy of this thing, and I read it, and I was infuriated. And then I got the finished copy, and I read it, and I was infuriated. And so I don't know what I'm expecting from the finished copy again, but it was $1, and I hadn't reached my carrying capacity, so I grabbed it, and it's this. It's Finale by Thomas Mallon. This is a novel about the Reagan administration. I remember reading this thing and being absolutely jaw-dropped and infuriated. And it wasn't the only time. This author wrote a book called A Book of One's Own that is wonderful. It's a study of keeping a personal journal that I just love. But this author also wrote a novel about the George W. Bush administration, specifically during Hurricane Katrina. And worst of all, he wrote a novel called Watergate, starring a heroic Richard Nixon. Not as satire, not as irony. I reviewed the Bush book was called Landfall, and I reviewed that, and the Watergate book was so infuriating that I reviewed it at enormous length. And if I remember, I'll leave a link to both of those down below. Although, keep in mind, if you're ever curious about any of these things, simply type in to Google my name and the author's name. That should do the trick. But I reviewed Watergate at length and was pretty harsh with it. In ways that I've heard a rumor got back to the author. I don't remember hating this book as much as I hated Landfall and Watergate. But we shall see. I will revisit it. That's one of the neat things about the Brattle, is that for $1 you can revisit something that maybe you wonder if it has enough time passed. Has your secondary reading maybe blunted the effect of that outrage? Who knows? Who knows? I will give it a try. It's not that much of an investment of time, and it wasn't any investment of money, so I will give it a try. This next one, you could say that this is research adjacent. Sometimes that will happen at the Brattle sale lot. Because the Brattle sale lot is not organized in any way except by price. So there's no telling what you're going to find. And sometimes I'll find a book and I'll think, okay, well that lines up, that subject matter or that author or lines up with a book that I am going to be reviewing, either short-term or long-term. Maybe this would be good as research. It's a bad idea. I myself, I don't think there are many people out there who go to the Brattle sale lot who have that possibility, but I always tell myself, Jeff, definitely don't do that. Definitely don't start using the Brattle as a research library. You spend enough money there as it is. And that wasn't the reason in this case, because the subject independently interests me. The subject is English country houses, which I dearly love. I have been inside, I've rummaged around inside a lot of these country houses. I've also been a guest inside some of these houses, not a tourist, but a guest of the people who live in them, people who own them as homes. This is by John Cornforth, and it is the Country Houses of England, 1948 to 1999, or 1998. And that title right there might tell some of you might remember, there's a new book coming out from the historian Adrian Tinniswood called Noble Ambitions, which is about exactly this subject. It's precisely this subject. So although I would have gotten this anyway, even if Adrian Tinniswood were writing about the Blitz, I would still have gotten this anyway, because the subject of English country houses really interests me. This is, you can't tell in this video, but it's a great heavy thing because it's full of photographs. Let me get you these. There's the that's a bed where Deb and I had many adventures. There are some full color photos of country house interiors. Do you want to get down, baby? Come on. Oh, I don't think you should lay down next to me, baby. There you go. There you go. So I would have got this anyway. You know, as a study of 20th century English country houses, I would have got this anyway. But it might, I mean, I'm going to read it right away, and it will probably help. It will probably inform that Adrian Tinniswood book. Probably it will. Probably it will be featured in Tinniswood's bibliography. One way or another, I grabbed it. And these next two, would ordinarily be a cause for great existential angst, because they both belong in the books about books, books about publishing bookcase that I've been complaining about for months now on this channel. Those of you who are brand new to the channel, maybe the algorithm has suggested, and maybe you're watching and just with your mouth open saying, what on earth is this? Yes, I don't know the answer to that question, and none of the people watching this video, even the ones who've been watching for years, knows the answer to that question either. So you're just going to have to roll with it. I have no idea what explains this. I have no idea what explains why anyone is watching this other than my old friend Deb and my old friend Sam. No idea at all, nevertheless. I have been complaining, discussing, kvetching for months on this channel about how I had all of my books on collected book reviews, collected prefaces, publishing memoirs. I had all of those together in a little bookcase in the little book room, and that bookcase was drastically overcrowded. Couldn't fit another thing on there, things jammed in, things double and triple stacked. So I finally decided, take all the books off the biggest bookcase out here in another room, take all the books off that, find homes for them elsewhere, so that bookcase is completely empty from floor to ceiling, then move all those books about books out here, put them on that bookcase, and you'll have plenty of room forever until Jesus comes back. And that lasted for about a week. I had elbow room there for about a week, and then that bookcase became just as cramped, just as massively overstuffed as the previous version of it. So ordinarily these next two books, which are collected reviews and about the publishing world, ordinarily they would fill me with angst, but that is not the case. That's not the case now. I have not mentioned this to you. I don't know why, since I've mentioned everything else that I think or feel or crosses my mind in any way. I've decided to do a massive book overhaul here. Massive. Oh, I think the reason why I didn't think to mention it in a video is because I mentioned it to Deb. And the two sort of blur together. Although she's up in Maine again, and not only doesn't have Wi-Fi for Zoom chat, but doesn't even have internet during the day. I swear, Maine. She wears a big floppy sun hat and gardens all day long. But one way or another, I have decided, not just for this reason, but it's among the reasons, to revamp the books in this place just completely. I did that just recently, but I'm going to do it again on a massive scale. No givens at all, on a massive scale, mostly in the outer rooms, not so much in my little book room. Step number one for that whole gigantic revamp is to give myself a little maneuvering room, which means a massive sale to the Brattle. So I am currently filling the floor of the kitchen with books that are going to the Brattle. They're going to a farm upstate to live a peaceful life. Once I've done that, once I've filled the floor of the kitchen by pulling books from hither, thither, and yon, then I will have enough room to maneuver in order to start moving massive amounts of stuff around. And one of the goals, it's not the only one, but one of the goals of that massive reorganization here is to finally make all the room in the world for my books about books, which are the books that I consult the most. Them and Penguin Classics. Penguin Classics are just fine. I revamped the Penguin Classic wall at the beginning of this year. Or actually the end of last year, Thanksgiving of last year. I revamped the Penguin Classic wall by pulling out all the duplicates. I had a ton of duplicates, just a ton of them, sometimes 4 copies of the same thing in Penguin Classic, by pulling out a lot of the Penguins that are of no interest to me whatsoever, where I realized belatedly that I was simply buying them because they were Penguin Classics, which is not me. That is not what I do. Not at all. I fell into the habit of that, but that is, for me, disastrous. So I looked at that Penguin wall, and I pulled out all the doubles, all the deadweight, and suddenly it required far less space than a whole wall of a room. But I still go back to those Penguins all the time. The ones that I have. I lost about 150 of them, but I still have a whole bunch, and I go back to them all the time. And the other books that I consult the most are those books about books. So they have to be able to breathe free on a big bookcase. That's one of the goals. So these two editions, which will be on that bookcase eventually, they don't bother me in the slightest. Not at all, tra-la-la. Because I'm going to have all the room in the world once that huge move is done. I'm never going to have to worry about it again, never. So this first one is a name that we've seen before. This is Leslie Stephen. And this is one of his collections of occasional work. Men, Books, and Mountains. There are considerations of novelists here. There are profiles of writers and of other people that he knew. And also he was a fairly avid amateur alpinist, and there are some stories about that as well. This is one of the many volumes, many collections that was done of all of his occasional nonfiction. He wrote a mountain of it, and I'm sure there are at least 10 books worth. I almost never encounter them. Just the other day at the Brattle, I encountered one. Here's another one. So that's great. I grabbed it right away. I'll reinforce it just a bit. It's in a little bit ragged shape. But I'll reinforce it and I'll reread. There's one essay in here that will get my attention right away before I put this on the shelf. Thoughts on criticism by a critic. I'll definitely do that. As soon as I reinforce this, I'll read that even before I get to the rest of it. And the same thing with this next one. This is by Peter Schwed, and this is Turning the Pages. An inside story of Simon & Schuster for a grand chunk of time where Schwed worked there as a very, very prominent and aggressive editor. This was the type of editor who he definitely wanted to parade his authors at great parties in Manhattan, definitely wanted the status that came from being the show-running editor on some very high-profile writers. But he also liked to hustle. He liked to make stars out of books as well. A totally distinctive figure. So this book will be, in fact, one of his specialties, if I remember correctly, was sports books, popular sports books, where he would get some sports icon, he would match them up with a really good ghostwriter, and he would try to make a phenomenal book out of it. This is going to be full of his voice. It's going to be full of his personality. This will not be a foursquare, boring publishing memoir. And I've never read it before. So I got both of those, even though once upon a time I might have cringed at the thought of jam-packing my most crowded bookcase a little more. But I don't have to worry about that. I don't have to cringe, because when my grand rearrangement is over, I'm going to have all the room in the world for everything. Everything. Step number 1 is to make a huge sale to the Brattle. That will clear off room. My goal is to clear off 2 whole bookcases worth of books. Not all from one bookcase, obviously, but the equivalent of 2 whole bookcases of books. I want to get rid of at least 400 books. And then I'll have room to maneuver. But anyway, this next book, definitely a keeper. It was in such rough shape that I had to reinforce it as soon as I got back here. The dust jacket was. The nice thing I like about hardcovers, in addition to how much more space you get, how much more congenial they are to read, is that they really take a punishment. They can really take a punishment. It's the dust jackets that suffer. And I have, those of you who are new to the channel will not know what I'm talking about, but I've been for years reinforcing the dust jackets of old hardcovers with just ordinary clear plastic packing tape. Which has invoked the horror of a number of purists out there, and I understand that completely. A number of purists have said you can't unstick that. You're ruining the resale value of this book. I hear that completely. I am not disparaging your horror at all, but I don't care about resale value, and I am not going to send these away to be jacketed by a professional. I'm not going to pay any kind of money for them. The clear plastic packing tape and scissors are right here. They're right here. That's what originally led me to them decades ago. And they get the job done for me. They make the dust jacket so that the thing is impenetrable. It's not, you can run water on it, it's not going to bother the book. You can get it smudged and wipe it right off. You can bash it around without worrying you're going to rip the paper. That's what I want. I don't do it with every book. If sometime around, one of you could probably tell me, one of you librarians could probably tell me, I think it was around the early 1990s, that publishers just routinely started giving their books a kind of laminate finish, their dust jackets, a kind of laminate finish, so that it wasn't just paper. Have I got an example? Yeah, this Leslie Stevens book, the dust jacket here is just paper. It's extremely delicate. It's just paper. Whereas, for instance, the dust jacket for this thing is not. It's sheeny. It's got a toughness to it. It's a different kind of paper stock. When I find a wonderful old book that I really want to give a new home and give it decades more time being loved, rather than inching closer and closer to the dumpster at the back of the sale lot, when I find a book like that has an old paper dust jacket that's falling apart, I reinforce that dust jacket. I am not intending to resell these books. We don't need to worry about it. And that's this. This is edited by John K. Terrace, illustrations by Walter Ferguson, and this is the Audubon book of true nature stories. Doesn't have any photos. Instead, it has, or I don't think it does. Does this have photos? No. Instead, it has these wonderful illustrations, both full page, and if I remember correctly, there are also spot illustrations in here. Yeah, spot illustrations as well. And I love this book, and I can't believe I found a copy of it. I just can't believe it. I encountered this book very early in my reading life and loved it, fell in love with it. A lot of these stories I read when I was only just beginning to have any kind of encounters with wild animals myself. And since then, oh my, I want this thing to be 3 times as long. But I loved it, absolutely loved it. When I saw it at the Brattle this morning, I gave a little, barely audible squeal of joy and also, nostalgia. I love this book just actively. It's not that it's only nostalgia, but I never thought I would see a copy of this thing again. I never thought I'd have a chance outside of maybe a library to read this again. And what library would keep this? After the 1950s, what library would still have their copy of this? I don't think any of them would. Libraries in the 80s and 90s went through a craze of de-acquisitioning stuff that I think was disastrous. I mean, I understand on a practical level. I'd love to talk, maybe have a Zoom chat with Mark Richardson about it, to find out, what the library thinking is. I'm sure the thinking was there's no room to hold on to books that no one's ever checking out. My heart still goes out to them. But this thing, I fell in love with this as soon as it came out, and have just thought about these stories ever since, especially when I've had real life stories of my own happen that were either completely different or very similar. When you encounter a porcupine in the wild, as I've done many, many times, you encounter a bear in the wild, or an antelope in the wild, or antic birds in the wild. I had an encounter with a pelican in the Florida Keys that is dramatically different from the pelican encounter in this book, but still fits with stories that people tell. I can't wait to reread this. I just can't wait. I think this also came with a bookmark. Oh, what is this? This came with something in it. Oh no, it's just an advertisement. It's just, publishers used to do this. They used to put in a special order form for a book. This is about a shooting guide that's in here. But anyway, I had to reinforce that, but that was, in many ways, the find of the day. And then we'll finish up with two big fat biographies, because what would a trip to the Brattle be without big fat biographies? First one is very big and very fat, and I had this. I've shown it on this channel in biography library tours, but I got rid of mine. I think I sent it to one of you. I had a hardcover at one point. I got rid of that, probably to one of you. I had a paperback at one point. I got rid of that, probably to one of you. But I do want this. In all the cases where I sent this away, I'm sure that I thought the Brattle will provide. You will see another copy, and then you can just get it. You know, and not everybody has access to something like the Brattle. So if somebody says to you, I really want that, and I live in a red dirt town with no library, no bookstores, 3-hour drive to the nearest bookstore, and they never change their stock. If somebody tells me, I really want that book, I'm so interested in the subject, better by far to pack it up and mail it and just wait for the Brattle to get me a copy than to say to a person who doesn't have the Brattle, well, tough luck, you know. One way or another, I'm sure that was my thinking on the subject, so I grabbed this today. This is Stanley Weintraub, who has never written a bad book. So if you're at a used bookstore and you, in the history of biography section, you see a book by Stanley Weintraub, no matter what it is, you're going to like it. He's never written a bad book. And this is his big fat biography of Queen Victoria. There is herself on the cover as a dewy youth, and there is herself on the cover as an old woman who has seen and done it all. And this is, it's a fairly big book with a tiny bit of sun fading on the cover, but I don't care. I was so happy to have this. I knew that the Brattle would provide eventually, and it did. Weintraub is terrific in anything that he writes, and Victoria's story is amazing. And I am not, as you know, if you remember my biography tours, I usually, if I find a subject fascinating, I'm perfectly okay having multiple biographies of that subject. I have Elizabeth Longford's biography of Queen Victoria. I'm happy to have this too. I don't know of many others that are as good as those two, but happy to have this one. Happy to add it back to the royalty shelf. And then this last book, also a big fat biography, not at all a subject I would ordinarily pick. But I noticed this morning that the Brattle had recently acquired an enormous number of books about Ireland, and all subjects Irish. An enormous number. We're talking hundreds and hundreds of books, hundreds of which have spilled out onto the sale lot. Probably hundreds more are still inside the store or in the basement waiting to come up and be priced, either for the sale lot or for inside the store. It's a vast collection. I saw dozens and dozens of books that I recognized, hundreds of books that I didn't recognize on every part of Irish history. I could have glutted myself. I only had what I could carry. I didn't have anything else with me, and I wasn't feeling all that good. So I didn't overindulge. But I said that we began this Brattle haul with 3 Men in a Boat, and that is Booktube inspired. That was a Booktube inspired pick. Not because I've never read it, and not because Mark at Book Time with Elvis had to convince me that it was good. I fell in love with the book. Anybody who reads it's going to fall in love with it. It's absolutely touching to know that it's his favorite book. It's part of this huge bookish world that we have created here in this little corner of Booktube, where I see a book on a shelf and I think, oh, so-and-so loves that author. And maybe I don't, but one way or another, this is completely different. 3 Men in a Boat did not need any convincing. Once I realized I didn't have a copy, of course I want a copy. This is different, but this is also Booktube inspired. Specifically Jason Harrigan, the aesthetic, the Byways and Bookland, the Black Sheep Books, whatever he's calling himself today. My fellow member of the OGPG, Jason Harrigan, who doesn't make enough videos as far as I'm concerned. I wish that he made a video every day. He easily could, just like Mark, just like me, just like Sean Stanfast. If they didn't have I have nothing else to do. But if they didn't have anything else to do, I guarantee you they can make a video on some bookish subject every day. Some new bookish thought that struck them every day. Some old book that maybe, I wonder what you think of this, or I'm wondering about this, something like that. I can live, I can dream, but it's the same thing. It's a different kind of book, but it's the same thing, where once I get to know someone as a reader, once I get to know and respect them as a reader, then when I know that they like things, even if they're not pushing them at me, I start to think if maybe I should reconsider. Maybe I should reconsider. Now, that happens all over Booktube. I'm perfectly willing to admit it happens all over Booktube. Happened with Mark for Three Men in a Boat. I will definitely reread Three Men in a Boat. Mark Richardson. Happens all the time whenever I go up there to Vermont. But probably a strong example, I can think of two with Mark Richardson. There would be strong examples. One is Nikos Kazantzakis. Mark really, really likes him a whole lot more than I do. I know that that is not just sentimentality, right? Objectively speaking, we know that Kazantzakis is incredibly talented. He never did it for me. And knowing a reader that he does do it for, well, that makes me want, probably the next time I find Kazantzakis in the Brattle sale lot, I will grab it. Almost certainly I will. And read it with that in mind. Nothing has changed except that I happen to know a reader who likes him more than I do. And I'm thinking, okay, maybe there's something there. With Mark, another example would be Hermann Hesse. Same thing. Like every time I encounter those little white mass market paperback English translations of Hermann Hesse, I will grab them and reread them. And with Jason, well, I don't like Samuel Beckett. He is the second greatest Irish writer that I don't like at all. The first being James Joyce. I don't like Beckett at all. I don't like anything that I have ever read from him. Nothing. None of it. And I know that Jason does. That's not controversial. If anything, my opinion is controversial. It's standard to allot Beckett a place among the literary immortals of the 20th century, certainly among Irish literary immortals. It's standard to allot him a place among the immortals. It's not questionable anymore. I didn't get any Beckett works. I'm sure that there were Beckett works of the Brattle that I could have got. Instead, I got this great big biography. This is by Anthony Cronin. It's part of that big Irish haul that the Brattle got. And there were so many books on Beckett. So many. There's so many books on everything. Just everything. I lost count. I stopped counting around 15 books on the Irish Rebellion. Eamon de Valera, Michael Collins. I lost track of how many things I was seeing. There were quite a few books on Beckett. I know that Cronin knew Beckett in a fleeting way, so he knew him well enough to have a kind of a personal stake in all of the research and anecdotes, but he didn't know him so well that I would suspect him of gilding the lily. I kind of like that middle ground, so I picked this one. Also, I admit the design did it for me. I really liked the design of this book. And I don't think I've ever read this. I'm almost certain that I have not. This came out in 1996, so it would have been before I was getting books from publishers, where I would have had to buy it or borrow it from a bookstore. I probably just didn't do that. If this even came out in America. I think it did, though. I think this is American HarperCollins. One way or another, I got a biography of Beckett. Will this ease me into reading Beckett? We'll see. We'll see. It's as close as I can come with an author I really don't like. For now, anyway. Boy, though, I need to take serious stock of myself. The next time I find myself at the Brattle, I can't possibly get that whole Irish collection. It's hundreds of books. And I don't want it all either, but it might be worthwhile to look around and see, just poke in detail and see what things I do want. There are quite a few Irish authors who probably only have one appearance in English, one appearance in American editions. I don't even know how many UK editions there were there, so I might need to look over, I do need to look over that collection a lot closer. But in the meantime, I got a biography of an author I can't stand. I will read this biography, and maybe that will predispose me better to his fiction, to his writings. We shall see. But anyway, that is the Brattle for today, starting the week off with a Brattle haul. So I got a big biography of Beckett. I got a big biography of Queen Victoria. What else did I get? The Audubon book of true nature stories. Unbelievable to find it. Unbelievable. After all this time, unbelievable. Turning the Pages by Peter Schweg. This is his sort of informal anecdotal history of Simon & Schuster. Men, Books, and Mountains by Leslie Stephen. This is... if the Leslie Stephen books are going to trickle out into the sale lot, I will take them all. Absolutely. Then we have the Country Houses of England, 1948 to 1998. Which again is an independently interesting subject, even though there is a new book that I'm going to be reviewing on this subject. Then we have Finale by Thomas Mallon. could be the most ill-advised purchase of the day. We shall see. The New Yorker book of cat cartoons, which I got for one cartoonist, not because I like the satanic little terrors, and then a bunch of a bunch of mass market paperbacks. We got The Kingdom of the Wicked by Anthony Burgess. We got Wilkes, His Life and Crimes, to complement Wilkes on Trial. Fantastic. We got 3 beautiful Marjorie Allingham Penguin Classic Crime mass market paperbacks. How wonderful to find these. Certainly merits rereading one of them right away before they go on the shelf. And finally, 3 Men in a Boat by Jerome K. Jerome, which is an odd, idiosyncratic English classic that I do recommend to all of you, but I don't recommend it as strongly as Book Time with Elvis. And there you go, at long last. That was our Monday Brattle Book Haul. No idea whether or not I'm going to be back to the Brattle this week. I think it's likely, but I'm not 100% sure. It won't be tomorrow, so I'm gonna wrap this up. God help us, it's gone on long enough. But I will be back. Thank you, Booktube.